I have been truly back in a reading phase lately ever since the start of the new year. I read 5 books in January and I listened to one, so I thought, I've never done a video like this before, but I thought I would do a little recap and review of the books I read in January. And if I stay on this reading kick, maybe I'll do one multiple months throughout the year. I'm sorry there was not a vlog last week. I don't know if you can still hear it in my voice or see it in my face. I am not well. I had a cold for about a week and then that went into my sinuses and now it's a sinus infection. Love that for me. This happens to me all the time. Sometimes it's allergies, but usually at least once a year, either a cold or seasonal allergies will turn into a sinus infection. Sometimes it turns into bronchitis. So I'm hoping we're on the up here. I lost my voice last week. That's why this week's episode of Prologues that went live today was audio only. So if something in my face or my voice is off, that's why. Also, I made a story graph. I've been enjoying the rating system and the little stats it gives you, like the way you can look at your own personal analytics a lot. I'll put my story graph in the description box if you care to follow. I'm not really like posting content on there. It's really just for me to keep track of the books I'm reading. The reviews I'm writing down are not extremely eloquent, really just my thoughts, so that when I go back and look at each book I've read, I remember the full plot. But if you want to follow, I will put it in the description box, and let's do these books. I think it makes sense to go in the order in which I read them. So the first book I read this year was Babel by R.F. Kuang. I talked about this book in a recent vlog, but just to recap, this book is set in the 1830s in Oxford. It's about a school at Oxford where students go and they study to become translators. There's a magical element in this world, which it's in a parallel universe to real life, I would say. There's a fantasy element because there's a magic that powers everything in the world, and the energy of that magic is conducted through words. And so to be multilingual and to study translation, very prestigious. Now the main character of this book is a young man named Robin. He's Chinese. He's brought over into the US by a Oxford professor for the purpose of grooming him to study at this school and to become a translator because he already speaks Chinese. And that happens to a lot of the students at this school, but it's the 1830s in Oxford, so all the students who are not white experience a lot of racism. The book is about, at its core, imperialism, capitalism, post-colonialism. There's intersections of gender and race. It's very political. I loved this book. How much did I rate it? See, this is why I also need a book tracker, as I can't even remember what I rated it. It was high. It was like 4.5 stars, I think. Yes, 4.5 stars. What I liked about it, it was raw. It was intense. It sucked me in. I couldn't put it down. I was like counting down the hours each day until I was done with my work and I could read it again. It was poignant. It was very sad and frustrating. The prose was beautiful. I learned a million new words. I was a linguistics minor, so the linguistics nerd in me loved this book. I really appreciated the type of fantasy book that it is because it wasn't super overt. Most of the things that are happening in this novel are historically based. It talks about the Opium Wars, the East India Company, the slave trade, the way that England colonized half the world. So a lot of those details are historically accurate. The fantasy theme is very relevant to the plot of the book, but it's small enough that it doesn't take away from any of the very real world events in the novel, if that makes sense. I took a class in college, because I was an English major, about post-colonial literature. I could see a book like this being taught in a college course if it isn't already. It will be in the future. I thought it was so well done. So I really loved it. The only reason I took off half a point, I felt like the author over-explained herself at times. The central theme of the book is not difficult to grasp, and there were times where I felt like she was reiterating her point unnecessarily. Like she repeated sort of the same phrases and the same points so often that at times it felt redundant. It's not a major criticism in any way. There were just moments where I was like, I feel like you've said this exact same thing 10 times before, but I wasn't that annoyed about it. I also took off half a point because I loved the main character's development, but a lot of the side characters felt a bit two-dimensional to me, especially one of the female side characters. We really don't get to know anything about her and her motivations and her story until the very, very end, and I wanted to know more about her the entire book. Like, so badly I wanted to know more about her. And some of the choices that the side characters made felt really predictable because they felt a little flat to me. But not that flat, because I did give it 4.5 stars. Like, don't get me wrong, I loved this book. There was just a couple, like, little minor things that jumped out at me. Other things that jumped out at me is I felt, if you've read this book, let me know how you feel in the comments. I felt like the silver working in this book was a metaphor for modern AI. That's how I read it. That could be totally left field. Maybe the author wasn't thinking about that at all. I felt like I was seeing the world in this book as undergoing this sort of industrial revolution. And when I was reading it, and I was reading the commentary on capitalism and imperialism, I couldn't help but think of AI. So let me know if you also got those vibes or if I'm nuts. But Babel, 4.5 stars, loved. So then I read this fun one, We Solve Murders by Richard Osman. If you've been following me on any social media platform for a while, you know how much I love the Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman. Thursday Murder Club, I've talked about it a million times. It's a book series that is very cozy murder mysteries. And when I say a cozy murder mystery, I mean they're not scary. They are funny, but still emotional. They're funny, but the characters are deep. The humor is very dry, very British. They're just cozy murder mysteries. And so this is a new series from Richard Osman, We Solve Murders. And this one is about a man and his daughter-in-law. The daughter-in-law is in private security, and the father-in-law is a retired cop. And through such a sequence of events, they find themselves teaming up to solve a murder. There's also a third character who is a author. I think she's in like her 70s or 80s, the book isn't really clear. She's had an absolutely crazy life and career, bit of a wild woman. The daughter-in-law is pragmatic, quite dry, and the father-in-law is a little whimsical. So those are the character dynamics going on, and they're solving murders. I gave this a 3.75. I docked it some points because it is basically the same thing as Thursday Murder Club. Like, it's extremely similar from the characterization to the humor, to the specific jokes, to the plot. Like, I don't think you need to read this if you have read and enjoyed Thursday Murder Club. But that being said, if you want to spend an evening with a delightful, cozy murder mystery novel like I love to do, this was great. I read it in one sitting by a crackling fireplace on a very cold January night. It was perfect. I wrote in my review, this book is in Osman's signature style, blending dry wit, lighthearted mystery, and unserious action with character moments that touch your heart. That's just kind of his thing. He'll make you genuinely laugh in the middle of like a life-threatening situation for one of the characters in his books, and then in the next chapter he'll make you cry about the inevitability of life. One thing I didn't like about the book, which is just a personal preference, is I just tend to not love it when books mention ChatGPT, Instagram, influencers, super modern inventions that can take me out of the story at times. And this book is super modern. Like, ChatGPT is referenced many times. I didn't hate it as much as I normally hate it, so that's high praise for me. It's just personal preference. I'm not reading, like, I don't tend to love that in a book. Like, why am I reading about influencers in a book? I'm trying to escape. I just realized opening it up how big the words are. I didn't realize when I was reading it how large the type was. I actually bought this in Norway, so you can see on the back the price sticker in Norwegian kroner. Another thing is that because it's the first book in a series, I can tell that he has plans to deepen the characters and give you a lot more insight into their lives in future installments of the series. But because it's the first one, I feel like I didn't get to know the characters as much as I would have liked. So I wish that there had been a little bit more depth from the jump, but I imagine it's because he has plans for multiple books in the series. So yeah, if you are also a cozy murder mystery lover, you will love this, but it is pretty much the same as Thursday Murder Club. 3.75. So then I listened to an audiobook. For me, audiobooks are the perfect accompaniment to doing laundry or cleaning or doing the dishes, something where I have to be using my hands. I prefer to listen to an audiobook over music because I think it makes the time go faster. And my favorite type of audiobook to listen to while I'm cleaning or doing housework is a little historical romance, a spicy little historical romance. That is my #1 trick for getting work done around the house. And I don't let myself listen to the fun little spicy little historical romance unless I'm doing housework. So it's like a hack. I hated this one. It was called The Key by Lindsay Sands. I love Lindsay Sands usually. Like, this bottom shelf, I don't know if you can see, is like 95% Lindsay Sands romance novels because normally I love them. I think, if I remember correctly, this was one of the first ones that she had wrote, so maybe she just like hadn't found her groove yet. Hated it. 2 stars. Honestly, 2 felt generous. It was like an 11-hour long audiobook, and it took me about 3 weeks to finish, which normally I'll go through one of those in like a week. Coincidentally, the house has been super messy all January because I haven't been enjoying my book, and so I haven't even really wanted to clean. Yeah, 2 stars looking back feels a little bit generous. I would never read this or listen to this again. I thought it was very slow paced. It was the most annoying male main character I've ever read in a book. I truly couldn't root for him at all because he pissed me off the entire time. Basically, the book is about, it's like in the Highlands or whatever. A girl from England, a man in the Highlands, there's an arranged marriage, all sounding good so far, right? Wrong. So the man and everyone in his keep just smell because they only take baths twice a year. And the woman from England was raised by a mother who insisted on frequent bathing, so she's very clean, but like the husband lost his mother at a young age and now he only bathes twice a year, and basically he stinks. And like that's the whole plot of the book. Like they have this arranged marriage to save her life, because that's always how it happens in these books, and she doesn't let him consummate the marriage on their wedding night because he stinks, and she wears like this leather chastity belt that's locked up, so the book is called The Key. And he hates the fact that he can't consummate the marriage because he stinks, because he's like, it's not time for me to take my biannual bath. And she's like, if you want to sleep with me, you need to take a bath. And that's the book. And it's like 11 hours long, an audiobook. He doesn't want to give in to her because he doesn't want to set this precedent that he's just gonna like listen to what his wife says. And she's like, you're not fucking coming near me when you stink. And they battle about that until about 95% of the way through the book, when all of a sudden they're in love. I hated it. He was so annoying. I think I was especially triggered because for me, like, I'm particular about my own bed, and you know, you need to be clean. I'm a little bit less OCD about it now because I have a dog, and so Fergus has helped me like get over some of the germ fears. But still, like, I have multiple times made my husband get out of bed and go take a shower because I don't like, if he smells even like a little bit, no, like, no one's getting in my bed if they smell, period. So I really related to her, and I thought the man was so annoying, like getting heated thinking about it. Typically, I love Lindsay Sands for just a fun little, fast little, medium spicy level historical romance. That was just not the one at all. Okay, so then I have another 3.75. I think this is a typical rating for me. This is The Burnings by Naomi Kelsey. I really enjoyed this book as well. So to set the scene, it's about 40 years after Mary Queen of Scots has died, and her son James is in power. He marries a Danish princess named Anna. Anna comes over to Scotland and brings some of her ladies' maids, including one of the main characters whose name is Margareta. That's one of the main characters, Margareta. Danish lady's maid to Queen Anna of Scotland, who has married King James. The other main character is Galus Duncan, who is a Scottish servant. They both have connections to witchcraft, and this is during Scotland's witch trials. So I've mentioned Scotland's witch trials in, I think, a TikTok recently, and a lot of you guys were surprised to hear that Scotland had witch trials. Yes, they did, and they were so bad. I believe I read at the back of this book 4 times as many executions per capita than any other, what was it? Per capita, Scotland executed 4 times as many so-called witches than the average figure for any other European country, and 3 times as many as their English counterparts. I live in Edinburgh, as you guys know. The Edinburgh witch trials are crazy. So many women executed. Edinburgh's history is so dark, so violent, so gory, really messed up. Edinburgh's history is literally like witches, executions, war, serial killers. That's why the ghost tours here are so popular. So it's during this time of religious panic in Scotland, and women are being burned at the stake left and right for being witches. So Margareta and Galus, 2 women who both have kind of connections to witchcraft. Neither of them want to have connections to witchcraft, but they do, and it's during a time of absolute frenzy. Like, anyone can accuse anyone else of being a witch. There's torture, there's all this stuff. This is also during a Bothwell plot to seize the throne, and both women get caught up with Bothwell. So part of the book is about witch trials, and then another part of the book is about this political plot to seize power. So also historical fiction, a lot of the details in it are historically accurate. Really enjoyed this as well. Every story about witch trials is really just about how women are never believed, and about misogyny, and about how a man's word is always stronger than a woman's, and about how intelligent women who speak their mind, and clever women, and women with a voice have been historically trampled on, always. And that's very much what this book is about as well. It's a book about how women are never really safe from men, even the well-meaning ones, because there are well-meaning men in this book, and they still end up fucking over the women. I've lost a light. Is this enough light to keep going? I lost one of my ring lights. We'll keep going. So this was a 3.75 for me. I took points off for dialogue. I felt like some of the dialogue felt awkward, felt stilted, did not feel historically accurate. Also, there's multiple different accents in the book, but the dialogue wasn't really written in a way that made me hear the accent in my head when I was reading it. I think that's a personal preference because some people hate that. I kind of love that. A lot of the dialogue felt like a little overly formal, just didn't feel like super natural to me, but I think that's also because several sections of dialogue did not feel historically accurate. However, the prose was beautiful. This book definitely has content warnings. There are some pretty graphic torture scenes. There are some rape scenes. It's a book about violence, about wartime, about executions. So I would look up content warnings if you feel like you need to. I would say the torture scenes especially were very uncomfortable to read, but very well written because I had like a visceral reaction when reading them and I could perfectly picture what was going on. So great use of imagery, just disturbing, but also accurate. And it kind of, when I was reading it, I kind of felt like, you know, this really happened to women. It's not just some story. This actually happened, and it happened very close to me because I live in Old Town in Edinburgh. So I walk by scenes in this book every day where women were being tortured and were being killed. And so in a weird way, when I was reading this book, even though I felt uncomfortable in a lot of moments, I felt like I almost owed it to their memory to bear witness to how horrible it would have been. So then I read A Study in Drowning by Ava Reed. I gave this one a 3.75 too. Wow, I love a 3.75 rating. This is a great fairy tale. So if you know the fairy tale of the fairy king who comes to the bed of this human woman every night and makes love to her, but she can't see his face and he's always gone in the morning, and then she's like, why can't I see your face? And he doesn't let her see her face, and then at last she like has a mirror and she tries to look at his face, and then it shatters the fantasy and he either dies or he never visits her anymore or something like that. If you know that story already, it will help you in reading this book. This is a retelling of the Fairy King fairy tale, and I read a lot of negative reviews about it on Storygraph, which really surprised me until I realized that I think a lot of the negative reviews that people left were from people who didn't know the original fairy tale, or who maybe didn't know this was a retelling. And that also made me realize that because I had prior knowledge of the fairy tale, there were gaps in the lore in the book that my brain just automatically filled in because I knew that fairy tale. But I think that's what made the book confusing for some people, because they weren't able to fill those gaps. So after I read this book and I read some negative reviews, I realized in retrospect that there actually were gaps in the lore and gaps in the world building that I had automatically filled in because I knew the original fairy tale, but if you didn't know the original fairy tale, you would just be confused. So I'm not saying that those negative reviews are wrong necessarily, I'm just saying I have a more positive review of it because I knew the original fairy tale. But obviously if a book is a retelling, it should be able to stand by itself. Like, you shouldn't necessarily need to know all of the backstory. So I guess it depends on how accurate you want your retelling to be. I don't know. That's just a little note. What this book is about: Fantasyland, fantasy university. Obviously Babel is like great dark academia. This is another great little fantasy dark academia book. Not as dark, but a little dark. Okay, so fantasy world, fantasy university. Our main character is a girl. She's named Effie, and she is studying architecture at this fantasy university. She wants to be studying literature, but she's studying architecture. She's the only woman in her department. She is abused by one of her professors, like her advisor, and rumors spread about her. She's harassed all the time by the male students in the school because she's the only woman. She's really not having a good time. Things are hard for her. She's also plagued by visions and by dreams all the time. She's pretty heavily medicated. Her doctor thinks that she has like a panic disorder because she sees all these visions. Stressed out. She's not having a good life. Her mother hates her. Rough life. She wins this contest to go and draw up blueprints for her favorite author's estate. Like, after her favorite author has died, his family wants to restore the estate. She wins a contest to go draw up blueprints. It's not just her favorite author, it's also like the national author of this fantasy country, so he's super, super important. Basically like a saint. When she goes there, she meets another student from the school, from the literature college. So she's already annoyed at him because she wants to be in a literature college and she's not. She's an architect. So they're already annoyed with each other. He's doing a project at this estate as well. Throughout the course of the book, she and the other student work together to uncover and expose this widely held belief in their society, and they're like uncovering the truth. So they're doing research, but there's also like brushes with the otherworldly because this is a fantasy book and magic is real. She's really struggling with this disorder that she has. It's making her see things. I really loved it. Drowning is a central metaphor in the book, and the way that it comes up, you know, both in a literal sense because there was a big flood in this country's history that really impacted the local people and kind of became ingrained as a part of the culture. But then she's also drowning at school. She's drowning in her mental health. She's drowning under the weight of other people's expectations. She's drowning under her anxiety. Like, drowning comes up again and again and again and again. And I really like the way that this author describes anxiety, describes the feelings of fear, basically. Again, beautiful prose. There is a romance. It was fine. It wasn't anything crazy. This is a young adult novel. It's not spicy. The romance is more of a side plot, I would say, which was fine. It was fine. It was like pretty chaste. It was paced appropriately, I thought. The book is more about Effie's personal development. I took off points because it was a really slow start. I didn't really feel invested in the story until around page 70, which is longer than I wanted to give it. Like, I almost put it down multiple times in the first 70 pages, and then after that I was really into it, but it was a slow burn for me. I also marked it down because there's almost like a side plot where the two main characters are from different countries and they're at war with each other, and there's a lot of like discrimination and prejudice and stereotype, and it didn't really feel fully explored. Like, I had a hard time at the end of the book being like, did that need to happen in order for, like, I don't think it needed to happen for the plot. It did not feel necessary. Considering the amount of time that was spent on explaining the stereotypes, you would think it would be for something, and for me it just didn't feel necessary. So I was like, this is kind of just like, we're weirdly focusing a lot on discriminating against other people, and yet it's not even like a major plot point. So I thought that was kind of odd. Again, maybe this is going to be a series and that's going to become more relevant later. I don't know. If a book is a part of a series, there's a lot that I'm willing to forgive in the first book in terms of things being unexplained, because we're obviously just setting the stage for future books. If this is a standalone, I'm like, just felt like we could have done more with that. I feel like we could have wrapped that up. Could have been more lessons. There's like one moment where the main character, Effie, was like looking at this other guy who she held stereotypes about previously, and she's like, oh wow, I was so wrong to judge, and like now that I get to know you better, I feel like it's crazy that I was judging you so much. But it just felt a little lackluster to me. So if you liked Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies, which I have somewhere up here, I think you would like this book because it's a fun little blend of magic and academia. So yeah, another 3.75 for me. Looking back at these two are quite similar thematically, and the way that they're written I think is quite similar. This is something totally different, but I do stand by these 3.75 ratings. I would maybe, actually I think I may bump the Burnings up to a 4. I stand by 3.75 for these. Okay, and then the last book I read was just a quick, this is called Runes, Andrew McKay, Divine Symbols of Prophecy. I picked this up in Norway as well. I gave it 3 stars. It's nonfiction. It's a brief introduction into the history of runes. There's a little bit of Norse mythology, a little linguistics. It's an introduction into Nordic runes, and so I didn't really know how to rate it because, I mean, you can see what it's meant to be. Like, this is a book that you pick up in a different country in a tourist shop to give you a shallow overview into a cool new topic, and I think it did its job. So I gave it 3 stars, but I didn't really know how to rate it. I just thought I would include it because it's something I read this month. Learning is fun. Okay, so those are the books that I read in January. Hopefully this video isn't too long. Thanks for putting up with my sick voice. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know if you liked it. You're always asking for more book content, so I thought I would just film it quickly, and I will see you next week.